And there we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is, as you know, a special COVID-19 update. We don't normally get together at 7 o'clock in the evening, but we were delighted to do so tonight in order to welcome Finance Minister Rod Phillips to Richmond Hill, at least virtually. Before we get underway, I would like to ask the chair of our board, Jason Cherniak, to say a few words.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everybody for joining us. Obviously, it's a real pleasure to have the Minister of Finance, and I think that this is really a testament to the great work that our board has done, in particular all the staff at the Richmond Hill Board of Trade. They really have been keeping us going strong and helping the local businesses, so thank you to the staff at the board for all the work they're doing. It also would not be a Board of Trade event without recognizing a few people in the crowd. So we do have some board members on the call here. We have our first Vice President, Rod Johnson. We have our Treasurer, Andre LaRosa, our Government Affairs Committee Chair, Cheryl Guinness, our past President, Randall Becker. I think that's it for existing board members. I see past Presidents Glenn Lott, Mayor Dave Barrow, of course, who also the mayor. Thank you for joining us. Councillor David West is a past president, and he's on the call here. And forgive me if I'm missing anybody. It's slightly different than what we're used to. We also have Councillor Greg Barros on the call, I see, so hopefully I haven't missed anybody.
Well, the only one you missed is MPP Daisy Y.
That's about what I was just about to say. So MPP Daisy Y has been very supportive of the Board of Trade for many years because she's also a past president. But as our MPP as well, she's been very supportive. And during this state of emergency, she's been joining many of our calls and she's been very helpful. And now I'm going to leave it to MPP Way.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much for everybody joining us. And of course, thank you to our Minister Rod Phillips. We are really excited. We just have PA Cho leading us with one of the town hall meetings. We have so many people attending and there are so many questions. So now we also have our minister addressing to a lot of the heated issues here with us. And we are doing this along with PA Parsa, and he will be joining us. Or is he already here? That he should say a few words. Actually, he is the one that organized this initially, and I'm happy to do this together with him in Richmond Hill. Thank you.
Michael, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Daisy. Thank you, Karen. First off, I'd like to thank all the participants who have joined us this evening, as well as the Richmond Hill Board of Trade for the amazing work that you keep doing every single day and to help us convey the important information during these very challenging times. Big thanks to Chair Jason Cherniak and, of course, Karen Mortfield for your tireless efforts. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the Minister of Finance for joining us tonight to hear directly from the residents of our business community here in Richmond Hill on the challenges of the businesses are facing and how we're going to support our businesses as we continue to reopen the province in phases that are safe, measured, and gradual. Minister Phillips, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and over to you, sir.
Thank you. So, Mayor Barrow, great to see you. Councillor Karen, thank you. Jason, as a former head of a local chamber and board of trade, I remember it's a lot of work in that. So thank you to you and your executive for all the work that you do, and welcome to everybody. I'll just make some brief comments, and then as PA Parsa and MPP May said, really here to listen mostly. I wouldn't want not though to take just a minute to just say how great it is to work with those two colleagues in terms of the work they do every day to represent Richmond Hill and in Michael's case, of course, Oak Ridges and Aurora as well. Michael, I get the chance to work with as well. He sits, although a non-cabinet member, he sits on Treasury Board because of his role as the PA there. So just all the time in the world for Daisy and Michael, and trust me, your community is exceptionally well represented. In terms of comments from my point of view, as you've heard from Daisy and Michael, what we have been trying to do is make sure that in a measured and safe way, we move through this very, very difficult health crisis, this global health crisis. We've seen and been participants in the success that the province has had so far, by and large, relative to many other jurisdictions, in terms of the management of this. And that really, as our Premier would say, has come through the efforts of 14.5 million people doing what they were asked, and no one more than our business community, because the sacrifices we asked of our businesses in terms of needing to, in many, many cases, shut down their operations, in some cases limit their operations, in other cases become literally essential services that allowed us all to keep making sure there was food on the table and the necessary supplies that we had. But it's been a huge sacrifice on everybody's part. Of course, no one more than our healthcare workers and frontline health professionals. We're by no means through the health component of this. As you well know, there's still challenges, particularly in our long-term care and other congregate living facilities. It's a major, major focus of every day what this government's doing and what we're doing with our partners in public health. We still are working very hard to make sure that the appropriate personal protective equipment is available, and that again is a challenge every day that's being met. We have the personal protective equipment we need, but we also know that it's going to be ongoing, and some of the things that we're going to talk about from a business perspective might mean that there's even more required as businesses need to look to opening up, and I'll talk in detail about that in a moment. We've also got the ongoing work we're doing to expand testing. So as of this last week, Ontario is right up the top of the league tables now in terms of per capita testing in the country. That wasn't the case to begin with, though, and there's been hard work that got us to that. And we're also working very much on contact tracing. And in fact, are working with the federal government to create a national strategy around that. But part of being able to open up effectively is going to be able to make sure that not only are we able to do the testing we need as community cases go down, but that we're able to trace the contacts where we do have outbreaks, and then be able to manage them very quickly so that we can continue to keep the economy open while also taking care of people's health and safety. So there are many, many moving parts to this. The role that I play typically as finance minister was shifted about, every day seems like a week in COVID time, but I guess it was back in the beginning of March where we had to shift gears, and uniquely among governments in Canada, we decided, many governments just issued their budgets as they were. We issued a one-year financial statement that reflected some of the difficult challenges that we're going to face on the revenue side as a government, but also the investments we needed to make. $17 billion in direct and indirect support for businesses and families, deferrals for businesses and families, direct support for our healthcare system to make sure we've been able to make the investments that I think have kept our acute care facilities from becoming overwhelmed. And I think that that was all worthwhile. And then now the Premier asked, with my cabinet colleagues, that I lead the group that's looking at the recovery. And so, we are working through our various, all of our MPPs, and I should say not just the government MPPs, but we've actually asked for the participation of all the MPPs in an unprecedented way to gather feedback in terms of the state of what's happening with regards to COVID. But very importantly, we'll have a full budget come the fall, and we want to have as much input as we can for that. So my ministerial colleagues representing the various parts of the economy have been out consulting with various sectors, and our MPPs are going to be doing that at the local level to bring back that feedback for us. So that's what we have been doing in terms of the status of the recovery and the reopening. Some of you may have seen today that we announced the limited reopening of some important parts of our economy. We said about a week ago that we were going to do this in a phased approach, where we would move in 2 to 3 week periods, because the 2 week period is the incubation period of COVID-19, but that we would move very systematically through a reopening. And of course, we're doing that to make sure that we don't have to shut down the economy again, because we are moving imprudently. Other jurisdictions have chosen to do things differently, and we watch and observe the progress they're making. But I think time is showing that following the science and the data, while still being able to open up elements of the economy. Today we announced hardware stores, work supply stores, garden centers would be able to open on Friday. We also said that as of Monday, curbside will be available, curbside retail for all retail stores. And then we'll move through our various phases. With that in mind, both the right health thing to do, because of course we all want to protect the health of our families and the health of our communities, but also just practically, what we want to do is be able to move in a way where we can continually build momentum and confidence. One of the things I'm spending a lot of time looking at is research and talking to business people like yourselves about what it's going to take to have workers want to come back into stores, to have customers and clients want to come back into businesses. I had an interesting conversation this week with a gentleman, quite a well-known technology entrepreneur, but he owns 2 businesses in Wuhan, China, which of course was the epicenter of this whole outbreak. It's been 4 weeks, I guess 5 weeks now, since Wuhan reopened, and he says he's still never had more than a third of his employees reattend at work. And again, this is because of a lack of, partly actually, to be fair, that's because of some of the physical distancing measures they've taken in some of those businesses that have reduced the need. But for the most part, he said that's because of the lack of confidence in many cases for people in terms of believing it's safe. So we all have a very difficult challenge ahead of us in terms of this reopening, but we are very dedicated to working with you. Most nights I do 1 or 2 of these kinds of Zoom calls or other kinds of calls to learn and listen, and that's what I plan to spend the rest of tonight doing. Obviously, I'll answer any questions as well that people have. But just before I do, let me thank you all for taking the extra time. I do remember from my times involved with the Chamber that it's those kind of opinion leaders that are the leaders in the broader business community, and quite frankly in the community at large. I know you're all just not interested in your businesses, you're interested in your communities. And so your interest in this, your leadership in this has been critical in terms of how successful we've been so far. And there's more to do, but it's going to be critical going forward as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And with that, Karen or Jason, I'll turn it back over to you in terms of answering any questions that anyone has, or just listening to feedback, whatever the Zoom call wishes.
Thank you so much, Minister. We appreciate that. And we appreciate you taking the time on what is a very difficult time for all of us right now. Just as a housekeeping note, I'll mention that we've had quite a number of questions come in the days leading up to this event, and I'll be reading those out as the hour progresses. If you do have a question, if you'd be kind enough to submit it in the chat box on your screen, we'll do our very best to make sure it gets answered. If we run out of time, we'll share the questions with MPPY and PA Parsa and ask them to take the lead in getting those questions answered. Before we get to the questions that have come in online, though, I will ask Mayor Barrow to say a few words. Mayor Barrow, I know you have a question for the Minister as well.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Phillips. It's a great pleasure to see you again. And I was talking earlier, I guess when this was organized, and I just have a couple of things that you probably already know about, being the finance minister, and that's some of the LUMCO things that you've heard from in the last little while. LUMCO, for people, are large size city towns that are together, working together in an area that's broader than the GTA, but it's still a very much sized area here. On the fact that we are, as mayors and CAOs, are feeling a financial pressure right now at this point in time, associated with critical services. We're unprecedented. There's revenue losses in the emergent crisis of municipalities. We're unable to run any budgetary deficits. I could ask you that if that could get through, we'd make it a lot easier for all of us. But I don't know how it's probably a good thing that you don't give us any more money than we get. But I think that there are some limited revenue generating tools that are there, and so our look at, and I'm just speaking on behalf of my community, but also on behalf of the LUMCO, if you haven't heard, and Stephen, Minister Clark has heard enough too, as we all work on. It's just the fact of, we can't reduce services anymore. And I think that's what we're hoping that your level of government, in probably a partnership with the federal government, could probably help us get through the process, that we don't have to reduce services such as police and fire and ambulance and clean water and some of the things like that, that none of us will ever want to do that. So that my question would be, have you had an opportunity to discuss that at your ministry? And I just want to say that that's a question that will be asked of you every time you go out each night, as you described.
So Mayor Barrow, thank you, and thank you again for your leadership and your council's leadership in this this crisis. So I, in fact, was speaking to Minister Clark, Steve Clark, for those who don't follow, is the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and I think Steve and I are going to be joining you on Friday for the large urban mayors, partly
Yes.
to talk about the opening plan and get feedback on that, but also to talk, begin that conversation about municipal finances. So you know, quite clearly, one of the things that mayors requested, including Mayor Barrow, was the ability to defer some property taxes, which we were able to facilitate out of the gate, just as we deferred education, health tax, and workers' compensation charges and such to try to manage some cash flow. But I think through Steve, we had a very good open dialogue. Both we would agree with you, and I think the request to the federal government is important as well. They do have the advantage of the printing press and are an important partner. But I think I certainly have been getting feedback, very positive feedback from the collaboration that's been happening between the municipal, provincial, and federal levels, and we hope to continue that.
Oh, very good, thank you. And just to say, also the reopening of the province is something that we look forward to virtually being a partner of yours, as we've started a program that is now called the Recover Richmond Hill Task Force. So we're dealing all that. We're looking after our businesses as best we can. We have a lot of things going forward in our Recover Richmond Hill, and Councillor West here is the representative here on that committee. So we're doing our best to make sure that everybody gets along. But sometimes we find out at the end we don't get along. So we appreciate you being here tonight, and I will now stop talking, Miss Moderator.
Well,
thank you.
The only thing I'd ask, and I'm sure you would include Daisy and others in that work, we're really trying to make sure we get as much input as we can. As I mentioned, we will have a budget in November. That'll be another bit unusual to have sort of two of those in one year, but a lot of things are unusual this year. But it also creates another opportunity to really make sure that we get it right in terms of the next steps for the province. So thank you.
No problem. Daisy and Michael are very good friends of Richmond Hill. Good. Except you have the title, sir.
Nope, that's why I'll be there on Friday.
Thank you. And I would note that as a member of Recover Richmond Hill, the Board of Trade's a member, and MPPY and PA PARSA are indeed members of that task force. So we're grateful to have them aboard and have their advice. If I may, I'm going to start going to questions we've been receiving from our members over the last couple of days. And one of the first ones was, Minister, would you give us a quick overview of what the provincial government is doing specifically for small business and how effective you've found those programs to be so far?
Well, we've had a number of initiatives targeted at groups, but that include small business. There was an announcement today about the extension of the time of use pricing. So I think the electricity bill reductions are particularly helpful for a number of businesses. We've partnered with the federal government in terms of the rent relief program that should be launched according to the federal government next week. And I'm happy to talk to some more detail about that. I'd be surprised if there weren't some questions there, but we've been working closely on how that program has been evolving to make sure that it encompasses as many people as possible, because we know that that is a very current pressure for many, many businesses. As well as people would be aware, we were significant advocates around the loan program that the federal government has put forward. I was pleased to hear today that nationwide, 510,000 businesses have been able to take advantage of that $40,000 loan, with the $10,000 of that being forgivable, as well as over 100,000 organizations have been able to take advantage of the payroll support program that the federal government is offering. In addition to that, there's a number of, I guess, what I'd consider smaller, more targeted initiatives that we've been taking. But when it came, one of the opportunities has been of this situation have been to eliminate some different rules and regulations, or at least suspend them temporarily. So, for example, for our restaurants that have been put into the position of just being able to do takeaway and delivery of food, we were able to change the regulations that had prohibited them from being able to provide alcohol with that. In fact, just last night, we were able to announce the modification of one particular element of that was making the sale of liquor with a meal a little bit more difficult. So everything from some larger programs, some in partnership with the federal government, some ourselves, to lots of little things to try to just help people get through what we know is an enormously challenging time.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of rent assistance for business. I know the effort has been well-intentioned. There have been challenges, as you referenced, and to that end, I'm going to go to Jason Cherniak, who's our chair, who has a question on behalf of the board.
Yes, and thank you, Minister. And we do appreciate all the good work that the province is doing, but to save time, I'm just going to focus on this particular issue. So we have been hearing from many members that are concerned about the commercial rent and their landlords. And unfortunately, we're hearing that the landlords don't seem to be interested in the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. In fact, what we think is happening is that those tenants are using the $40,000 loan to pay their rent because the landlords know the money is there. So why would they not want it if they can get it? Just thinking off the cuff, I wonder whether maybe there should be more forgiveness for companies that can prove they used that loan to pay rent if their revenues went down by more than 70%, or if they were forced to close by government order. So that's something to consider for recovery. In the shorter term, though, the board at its board meeting on Monday adopted a policy to call on the Ontario government to freeze commercial evictions for rent arrears that began after March 2020 until 30 days after the state of emergency ends. We do think that this is appropriate for several reasons. Obviously, it would protect small businesses from eviction. It would be in line with the already existing policy to stop residential evictions. We think that in current market conditions, it's unlikely that any landlord will benefit from an immediate eviction in any event, so they're probably not losing anything. And for that reason, it does seem to be neutral between landlords and tenants, and it leaves the province some ability to maneuver in the future to deal with the problem during recovery. Thank you. So we're wondering what you think of that policy and what other ideas you have.
Yeah. So listen, we remain open to all the ideas. I think one of the hallmarks of the response, our own and other governments, and frankly, businesses and communities, has been the willingness to be flexible and see what works. But let me talk a little bit about the program that we and the other provincial governments have partnered with, and why I think it still has potential. Obviously, the program has not been opened up yet, so let's not declare it dead until it's been born, in terms of, and that the federal government is committed that program is going to open up next week. It's being run through Canada Mortgage and Housing, and I'll come back to that, but there's a reason why that gives me some confidence. The program itself initially launched, but we said at the time we were very open to hearing about alterations. We've been dealing with a number of chambers, the CFIB. I was talking to Dan Kelly on the weekend about it. So we've been able to modify it significantly to deal with a couple of outstanding issues. One has been to make sure that it's for gross rent. So that means the total value of the program, because it's now going to be on gross rent, not net minus profit, which was the original suggestion. The value of the contribution now is of over $1 billion just in the province of Ontario, because obviously it costs more to do it on gross rent, but that's obviously as well an inducement for landlords to participate. The other thing that was raised as a concern, and a legitimate one, was that people without mortgages. Now, the vast majority of individuals who own properties do have mortgages, just because the financing of that real estate makes it advantageous to have a mortgage, but not everyone does. So similarly, the federal government has agreed, as the provinces have, to make sure that the program is now available for those with mortgages. incumbent in the program, which, as I said, we'll roll out next week, and substantively, again, the federal government's doing it, but they're committed to that. I have confidence in them. Is the lack of ability for a landlord who participates to evict or raise the rent, not just during the period, but immediately after the period. So there's a number of the protections built into the program itself. Now, so that's that, and let me just speak a bit about Evan Siddell. The fellow who's running it is a guy that I know, the Canada Mortgage, head of Canada Mortgage and Housing, very competent individual. I believe a lot of good work has been done, and I think the program itself, because part of the challenge with a direct subsidy to tenants, which was one of the other options, is that there are 1.2 million individual commercial arrangements and leases in just commercial leases in the province of Ontario. So obviously the opportunity to work through landlords allows for a lot of scale. First of all, because there are a handful of large landlords owned by pension firms and funds and others that probably account for about 40 to 45% of all the spaces. So this program will work for them. So that means that 45% of the folks will buy in. But we understand as well that there's a majority that are smaller landlords, and still would be very hard, easier to deal with that relatively large group of landlords than it would be with 1.2 million people individually from a subsidy perspective. With regards to the proposal around making it illegal per se to evict, unlike the residential tenant situation, there is actually a mechanism to do that relatively easily, which is that there's a review process for residential circumstances, and the province, as we did, could just suspend that process and effectively suspend the ability for people to be evicted. To do what others have proposed and you proposed here would, at this stage, from a legal point of view, involve intervening in 1.2 million individual legal arrangements, and so the mechanism to do it is not easy. This is not to say that we're not going to do things because it's not easy. It's just to say that we are looking at what can be effective and how quickly we can be effective, and there is not a simple mechanism as there was in the residential setting. The other risk, of course, is that you set up an inverse sort of jeopardy, where if people cannot be evicted, as has happened with some of the residential landlords, people decide not to pay rent because they don't have to. And the problem with that is that will simply accumulate the problem for the tenants, whereas the solution we proposed essentially locks in their risk, which is 25% of what their liability would have been, locks in landlords at 75%, which is better than most in the work we've been able to do, we're going to be able to achieve. And of course, the government's absorb the difference in that. So although a ban on evictions might prove as a short-term solution, you would still have the problem at the end of the day, which is that if the accumulated rent would be owed, and in fact, this solution would put a cap on that from a tenant perspective, and we think from a landlord perspective. So all of which is to say, long answer, but I know it's an important question. We're open and looking. We want to find a solution that works. This program will be rolled out next week. It is also entirely possible that landlords, at least some of them, would want to see what money they could get before the program was in place. Remember, it does come April, May, and June, so it's for that 3-month period. And we're going to have to see together how it works. And as the Premier would say, if he was here, no ideas are off the table, right? We want to make sure that we do what is necessary, but we have to do things that are practical and can actually get to the people who need the help. And I do think that there's a reason why this solution, I'm quite confident it's going to work for close to almost 50% of the tenants, because those tenants are, their landlords are large pension funds and the large groups that even those that don't have mortgages that now are aligned to it. We are going to have to see and monitor it closely in terms of its broader application.
Thank you. I appreciate the very full response that you've given us. I will say, as a lawyer, even if the eviction doesn't occur, there is still a default under the lease, so tenants aren't completely free and clear. But I just thought I would note that, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad you're keeping your mind open. Thank you.
Very much so, and thank you for the suggestion. I promise all my answers won't be that long, Karen. I just I figured that was on lots of people's mind, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So.
It's a major issue. We appreciated the major answer. Our next question comes from one of our members, Jonathan Landon, who notes that the performance of the Ontario government is impressive, to say the least. And Jonathan mentions the fact that when the crisis struck, many Ontarians were in the process of bringing innovation to market. And now they see those plans stalled. The opportunity for financing has tightened up considerably. The question is, can you comment on what the government is considering in terms of helping the innovation engine of Ontario spin back up?
Yeah, so Jason, this sort of issue is very much on my mind. I combine this issue as well as, not because they're exactly correlated, but also the issue of younger people who are just coming into the economy and the impacts on them of the changes they've seen. My own experience, I graduated into the 1990, what we called a recession back then, but was barely a blip compared to this. But I remember the dramatic impact it had on early stages of careers and also on innovative businesses then, in some cases impacts that lasted a very long time. We are trying to look closely with our colleague Vic Fideli, who's our Minister of Economic Development. We have a number of programs that are already in place that are targeting the kind of companies where there is an innovation opportunity. I can say that part of what I've been doing is working quite closely with the banks in terms of making sure that they understand the impacts and whether that's on personal level and the kind of extensions they provided on personal mortgages, but also on this vital part of the economy. I had a meeting today as part of the outreach that we're doing with the Jobs and Recovery Committee with I guess there was about 15 of the top private equity and venture capital firms in the province, and heard very much from them about how they're making plans and the sort of things that government might be able to do to support them to try to preserve the value that's been created. Some people, a little bit of a tangent here, but I guess to frame the issue, some people are comparing this to SARS. Some of us were around back then and will remember what that was like. Those who do will remember that Toronto and Hong Kong were the two places quite affected. I guess we'll say the GTA and Hong Kong, but that those communities, despite the impact, could emerge into a more vibrant global economy. We're going to be emerging into a very difficult global economy, whatever we do on the recovery side. So we're trying to make sure that we can prioritize some government resources, that we're staying close to the innovators themselves and to those who finance the innovators, and get back to something I said before, looking at where we can remove regulatory barriers, whether that's with regards to financing or support for companies or the sorts of things they need to do to innovate. That was always an agenda of our government, which was our red tape reduction agenda. But what we found is this is now a very opportune time to try to move some of those barriers out of the way. So
We seem to have lost Minister Phillips.
nope, I'm still
There
here.
you are. You're back with us. Excellent.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Thank you.
All right. So I don't know if I've logged off a bit there, but I gave a very eloquent answer that only I heard probably.
It was fantastic.
Thank you.
We're seeing a few questions come in now, acknowledging the fact that both the provincial and the federal governments are making almost daily announcements about changes and efforts to continue to improve the plight of businesses and individuals across Ontario. And there seems to be a bit of information overload happening where businesses are wondering where they go to find out what is happening next, when the next business sector is going to be unlocked and allowed to go back to business, when things will change. You can watch the news, but if there is a single resource that you can recommend, I know that the Ontario government has some excellent information on this website.
Sure. So Ontario.ca/COVID is a great source. I mean, not as entertaining as watching the Premier and some of us, have to answer questions every day. So we certainly appreciate the audience. It is an area of focus for us as well. You would have seen a fair bit of advertising, I hope, relative to the health issues on COVID. You will now start to see some of that advertising as we move into the reopening phase transition, because we recognize that there's a lot of information flying around out there. Also, shameless plug for the Chamber of Commerce, but I think the
Oh no, that was not the time for your microphone to die.
on what's happening and how they're evolving. And it's not a small issue. We had an issue today come up where, you know, the evolution of the rental program I talked about earlier, we still had some stuff posted on our website that didn't reflect the fact that we'd now moved to gross rent. Because we still had the press release from a week and a half ago, or when we announced it, and of course the program had evolved. So we're going to try to use sort of paid media to try to be clear with people and make sure that we announce our plans. I think to create confidence, not just for employers but employees and customers, we owe them that kind of transparency. And I do know my colleagues with Michael and Daisy up to the best in terms of they're always a good source for these things as well.
We have a question that's come in through email, which is, given that the economy still looks pretty bleak from a jobs perspective, what are your top 3 priorities as Minister of Finance, and how will you and your team accomplish these 3 priorities?
Great question. You can always tell business people's questions because they're priority oriented. So I mean, our first priority has to be to get the health crisis under control. The foundation of the economic issue is the health issue, and without getting that secure, nothing else follows from that. Now, I think that is the work, I have to say, primarily of our Minister of Health, Christine Elliott, who's doing a fantastic job with that, and that is an area where Premier Ford is laser focused, whether it's the procurement of PPE or making sure that there's enough testing capacity. But this is got to happen first. In terms of where we go from there, we've set out several health-related criteria that are, in fact, the benchmarks we set for ourselves, so that we are going to be in a position to move to the opening. So I spend a fair bit of time, again, making there's resourcing around testing, tracking, and we've called for a national tracking app and working with the federal government closely on that, to make sure that we are maintaining the hospital capacity in our acute care areas. Although we want to reintroduce elective surgeries, and it's important that we bring back other parts of the healthcare system, we have to make sure that we maintain some capacity, because it is entirely possible, and in fact will happen, as we open up the economy, there will be some surges. And so when we're able to track those surges, we need to make sure we have the ICU room to treat people. Again, for the health of those individuals, but also to make sure that the economy can continue to open without any major steps back. And then I think the third component really is just all of the components, some of which I've talked about getting the economy moving again. I am, as my colleagues are, we are, progressive conservatives. We believe in doing the right things for people, but we also know that you have to pay the piper at the end of the day. I was, about 2 weeks away from bringing in a budget that was going to show us on track to balance the budget by 2022. And we had to turn around and come out and say we're going to have over $20 billion in deficit. And quite frankly, that was when the economy looked a little better than it does now. So I think we need to get the economy back up and running. We need to help our businesses with that, help employees with that, and help customers with that. To the extent that we can do that well, then I think we will fare quite well. And then I just always wrap around that is that we have to remember that the challenges, Ontario is a nation or province within a nation that trades a great deal. We are surrounded, if you think about it, by some jurisdictions, whether it's New York State that has the largest COVID death rate in the world, Michigan, which has the third highest death rate from COVID in America, and then next door to us is Quebec, where they're having had the most significant issues. So we have to think about ourselves and get ourselves on track. Understand that some of the people that we trade with and work most closely with, their issues are going to be our issues as well, if not from a health perspective, from an economic perspective. But really just be ready to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to come when the economy does start to come back.
Thank you. This question comes from Henry David, who, in the interest of transparency, I should note, is a member of the Government Affairs Committee of the Toronto Real Estate Board. And the question is, when the lockdown is fully eased, does the province have any plans to stimulate the real estate resale market by implementing, for example, a moratorium for a period of time on the payment of provincial land transfer tax?
Well, Henry, as I said, we're looking, and we'll look progressively as we work our way through these stages at a variety of options, I'm sure, and that could be one of them. There's been other discussions from the real estate community about whether or not some of the foreign buyers taxes and other things have been put on there. We will want to encourage people to engage the economy again in the way that they can. So this is part of the consultation, and I'd encourage them to use your venue and the venue of our fall budget to provide that kind of feedback. We are in a very unique time in many ways, where I think some things that would not have been thought about as on the table at all even 7-8 weeks ago, where we want to think about, because back to that priority, we want to get the economy humming again in a safe way.
There, I forgot to unmute myself. Next question is, my car has been sitting in the driveway for a month and I don't think that's changing anytime soon. How do I get a rebate from my car insurance company?
Well, that is a question that is very much on my mind. We about 2 weeks ago, we made it clear to the insurance companies collectively that the realities of driving have obviously changed, as the person who asked the question mentioned, and that we would expect them, like many other businesses have, to remember that the customers they're going to have for the next 5 years are the same as the customers they've had for the last 5 years. So there was still work to do there, but I'm happy to say when we said that, I met with the senior executives of the major insurers in Ontario. About 14 insurance companies represent about 97% of the market. And when I met with them, I said, what do you need us to do from a regulatory point of view so that you can do the right thing? And one of the things they pointed out was that direct rebates, cash rebates in Ontario were in fact against the rules. So a week and a half ago, we changed that because they had asked us to. And now we are monitoring the results. Thus far, of those 14 companies, and this is just, I check these numbers every morning, so I could give you a new update tomorrow morning, but 8 of those 14 have in fact initiated rebate programs. They have to go to the regulator FSRA to get them approved. So they're in various stages. A rebate would be a direct cash rebate back to drivers. There's also another 12 of the 14 that are looking at refunds, which is slightly different. That would be reductions going forward on programs. But given that it's insurance, I've learned that you have to read the small print. So we're keeping the pressure on to see, first of all, that everybody's doing something, and then how easy is it to collect, and what is the quantum? And does it reflect the scope of this change? And so I'm pleased that they've moved after our initial comment. The Premier last week, it was asked of him, and he made it much more blunt than I did. And as I've mentioned to all the CEOs, you wouldn't want and I suspect, in the weeks ahead, we'll probably have some more information on it. But the questioner is right. One company, Farmers Mutual Company, is in fact returning all of its surpluses from this period to its customers. So I would suggest that everybody sign up with the Farmers Mutual Company, except that you have to be a members of the Farmers Mutual to do that. And I'm not sure how many of those we have in Richmond Hill. But anyways, there's more work to do here, and we're on it. And then businesses need to behave in the right way, and people are going to remember who was fair and who wasn't, and we're certainly going to remember.
Thank you. Next question. Many businesses will not survive the current situation, and entrepreneurs will be trying something new. Is the province going to encourage new types of businesses with loans or grants?
Again, we're going to look at everything. The reality, of course, is that even in a normal year, many businesses don't succeed, and this is far from a normal year and far from a normal economy. But it is exactly the kinds of conversations that we've been having about what are the barriers. Not only, one of the things that some have noted is that failure is a bit tougher here in Canada than it is in some other places from a business perspective. And what are the things we need to do so that people can try, and if they don't succeed, try again. Really create that momentum around innovation. I've been very involved, as have my 2 colleagues, in quite 2 very innovative strategies that we've been working on. One is around the data economy and what we need to do to secure the foundations of a data economy. And the second is around intellectual property. Some very interesting work that Jim Balsillie did for us, who was one of the founders of Research in Motion, which identified that Canada and Ontario had the lowest number of registrations for patents of any of the top 20 countries. Right, it's a blind spot that we have. We have a lot of great technology companies. We have a ton of fabulous work done here, but we don't necessarily monetize and commercialize work, especially given that our universities and healthcare systems and other institutions generate and cause many of these innovations to happen, and then the money is taken to another jurisdiction, and frankly the jobs sometimes. So all of that we're looking at even more aggressively. The other thing I should say, one of my colleagues, our colleagues, Peter Beffenfalvey, who's the chair of Treasury Board, is looking fundamentally at what we do differently from a government point of view with regards to procurement, digitization, remote operation, all the things that businesses are doing. We're doing the same thing. And finally, just because every answer has to take, I always have to get all my talking points in. I'd initiated a review that a gentleman named Waleed Solomon is doing to review our capital markets. It had been 15 years since we'd reviewed what we're supposed to review every 5 years, which is the nature of our capital markets and the securities legislation and regulation to make sure that there's access to capital for new businesses and startups. So that review is continuing apace, and again, reviewing how
Thank you. Next question. That comes to us from Errol DeRay, who is on the call with us. And Errol asks, once businesses are allowed to start up again, do you anticipate that the safety measures and the restrictions that will be in place, we would imagine, as things get up and rolling, will they be dictated by the government, or will it be left up to the businesses to determine what safety looks like?
So our Minister of Labor, Monty McNaughton, has been very active, and I will get the website location for you before we end the answer to this question. But what we've done to provide guidance from a health and safety perspective, the Ministry of Labor has already produced more than 60 guidelines. So for example, we talked today about the fact that curbside pickup will now be an option for all retail that's not in a shopping mall, if you have an outside door starting Monday. Well, there are 14 specific points that has been laid out to identify what sort of health and safety requirements should be in place so that curbside pickup can be done effectively. We haven't just done this based on civil servants, bless their hearts, sitting there drawing up the list, but we've been working extensively with the Retail Council, with outside folks, and in particular with the LCBO, which happens to report up into the Ministry of Finance. So about 6 weeks ago, I asked the CEO at the LCBO to basically use that retailer, which remember has large retail outlets, small retail outlets, rural, urban, e-business, extensive distribution and warehousing, to use them as a case study so that we could actually see what works and what doesn't, and they have. So all of that inputs have been put into these rules so that people can see how they're going to operate. Now, at the end of the day, the government is not going to bring back the economy. The government is not going to bring back the jobs. Entrepreneurs and business people are going to bring back the jobs. What we're trying to do is make sure that we provide some guidelines, as we normally would, informed guidelines that can be modified as people become creative with things, but to make sure that customers and employees can feel comfortable that they're working in a safe environment. And I have to say that many great ideas. I'll just give you one on the retail front that came through the LCBO experience. One of the issues, of course, is the number of people in a particular retail space. But for instance, there's great detail that they've provided about what they clean, how often they clean it. The idea of hotspots inside of a retail store. Now, I was a business person, but I was never in retail. But of course, one of the issues in some stores, if they're a bit larger, is you may have 50 people in the store because it's quite large. But if 40 of them are all looking in one aisle, then you have this clustering of people, which needs to be addressed. So information like that is included in these guidelines. I'll make sure that we share the website for them. And then we'll be continuing to get feedback on what works. And we're at the end of the day going to rely on great business people to figure out the innovative ways to protect their customers. But we did see it as our responsibility to make sure we did it in a way so people knew, what we've learned about how to be safe and how to be healthy. No business person wants to be the one that we hear about that had the COVID-19 outbreak. I mean, that's not going to be great for their business. So we want to support them as much as we can.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone on the call, the Board of Trade website has a great deal of information on it and very useful links that will point you to various spots on the provincial and federal government websites that offer insight that may help you get started at least. And we're always glad to carry any links to any of the government pages that offer additional information. This question, if I may, comes from, I don't know who it comes from, but I suspect I know. If I was guessing, I would guess it was one of our chiropractor members. And she asks, there is still confusion around the CERB benefit program for those who are small businesses and sole proprietors. As a sole proprietor, if my business is still receiving income to cover operating expenses, however, the individual has not been paid from the business, do you qualify for CERB?
You know what, I'm going to have to, and I might ask one of my colleagues, maybe Daisy or Michael, to get back to the individual. I don't want to give the wrong information. What I do know is that sole proprietors are eligible for the program to the extent that they're still receiving income. I believe there was a minimum threshold of income. And so I don't want to, give the wrong information and send someone down the wrong path. But I'm sure Daisy, I'm looking at Daisy, I'm sure Daisy would be happy to get back to that individual with a specific answer. And again, that's a program that's evolved as people have given feedback to the federal government through ourselves and others. This is back to the situation that we find ourselves in. That was a program that didn't exist 8 weeks ago. Today, the federal government announced that 7.5 million Canadians are now taking advantage of the program, and 10 million Canadians have applied. So that's a remarkable statistic that just gives a sense of the breadth of the commitment people have had to step away from their lives and be willing to do the things that are necessary, but also the impacts on people. Can I just give that website for that Ministry of Labor?
Please do.
And it'd be great if you guys could post this on your chamber website. But if you go to ontario.ca/COVID-19-support-businesses. So I'll read it again, ontario.ca/COVID. Now it's just -19-support-businesses. That links you to a number of things. There was an earlier question about general information, but that links you specifically to the Ministry of Labor's guidelines. And literally there's new ones coming out every day. So if you have a nail bar and you want to know what the rules would be, even if we haven't said when nail bars will be open, it can start to get people prepared for what, I know Michael's missing the nail bars in particular. So without a pedicure, he's a bit of a problem, so.
Well, I know that before you came on the call, Minister, we were all whining about hairdressers being closed, but we've accepted bad hair as the price of safety for all of us.
The one advantage of not having dyed my hair so far.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to ask if PA Parsa would like to say a few words to wrap things up. And I'd like to ask you, Minister, if there's any thoughts that you have that you'd like to leave us with. We're very appreciative of the time you've taken tonight.
Well, just before my colleagues speak, thank you again for taking the time. It's, I don't know, maybe it shouldn't seem, and I know, Mayor, you've been in politics a while, and my colleagues, but it does always just give me gives me hope and inspires me when I see just how engaged so many people are in finding solutions. And I think that is at the end of the day what this is about. Our parents and our grandparents faced worse things, than extended periods at home. And yet this is the crisis that we've been called upon to collectively respond to. And I'm just always so proud of my fellow Ontarians when, in terms of the resilience. Listen, I always say it, you can tell people are getting frustrated, getting antsy, wanting to get out into the nice weather. Trust me, we all would want to do that. My last point would just be, please, stay the course, encourage those who you work with and otherwise to keep listening to our public health officials. They really do have our best interests at heart. We'll make sure that the instructions in terms of how to open your business are there. We'll adapt them and adjust them as we learn. That's been a great lesson of this this whole thing. We all have to be a little bit humble about what we think we know. But if we stay that course and we do the right thing, I'm exceptionally confident that we're going to come out of this well. And we're just gonna be a while to get back to where we were, but we will keep with that trajectory. So so thank you very much to everyone for the efforts you make as leaders in your community, and thanks for the time tonight. I'll kick it over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much, Karen. I also want to thank my colleague Daisy Way, as well as Mayor Barrow, Councillor West, Councillor Munch, I see, has joined us, and I believe Councillor Greg Barrows was with us earlier. And all of you, thank you very much for joining us in the evening on Wednesday. Before I let you guys all go, and as you know, it is Takeout Wednesday for us to support our small local restaurants here. Before I let you guys go and do that, I want to thank the Minister for taking time out of his schedule to do this with us. I know that he's got an incredibly busy schedule, but yet makes time all across the province to hear from all of us. All of you, your feedback is greatly important to us, because how we reopen the province will depend on the feedback that you provide to us. And on that note, I would like to let you know that there is a survey that I will be sending to Karen and Jason, if you don't mind, to share with all the members. And that survey will be one that you could use to be able to share your suggestions, your ideas with us. Again, thank you all for your help. And I also want to end on one note. The minister's, Jason's note about the rent, the Okekra program. Jason, I think when I was talking to most of the landlords initially, some of the concerns was about the fact that the rent would only cover the profit portion of the landlord. And now that has changed, the gross amount, perhaps that will be a lot more attractive to some of the landlords. So at least we hope. Karen, thank you so much. Daisy, thank you all for your time, and look forward to seeing you. And as always, you know where to contact us, and you know where to reach us if you have any questions. Thank you all.
Thank you. And just to wrap up, there were so many questions tonight, and they were all great. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We are taking note of all the questions, and we will share them with Michael and Daisy, and ask them to get back to you with answers to all those questions. And again, Minister Phillips, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It has been several decades since I saw you, but it was also a pleasure working with you at Queen's Park many years ago.
Yes, Karen. Good to see you again too. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and we will see you again soon. Good night, everyone.